Hi, okay, let's dive right into this one. I was looking for something and I stumbled upon this one channel, modeling channel, and as I've mentioned, it's very few modeling channels that I ever watch for anything. This one looked okay, but after the first minute of intro music and I couldn't even go further, switched off. So I hope you really appreciate the absolute lack of effort that I put into any intro and outro and so on. Right, Bowfighter has had quite a bit of work. Nacelles on, but only tack welded on, so to speak. Exhausts properly on, and those intakes on the top on. I have not made a nose yet, so I don't have the nose, and I have no idea how I'm even going to make a nose. I would like to avoid what I've done on the Savoia Marchetti, being a balsa wood nose, which then needs to be filled. I'd like to get, now I could do 3D printing, but that still leaves me with a lot of work to do. The scrap box is an option to try and find something close. In any case, the reason this is painted silver, and I'm not going to speak much about this at the moment, other than it's actually not silver, it's aluminium with a dash of green mixed into it. Now, when I hold it up like that, it shines quite well with this light, with this bright white light. But it's actually a very toned down, and it's got a bit of a green tint in it to give a bit of an aged effect. And we'll be speaking a lot about these two, which has also had its aluminium paint. All I wanted to say at the moment is that step one is just to get away from the plastic colors. Give a base, put me more into the mode of starting to feel the aging process of this aircraft, because this one and the Hudson are going to have quite a multi-stage painting process. Nothing like the quick paint jobs on the Lightning, for instance, and on the Wigian and stuff like that. These ones are... Now I'm feeling this, by the way, as you might be noticing. So this needs some sort of rub down. Sometimes a cloth, yeah, even that makes quite a difference. Even just a little piece of toilet paper, because this essentially matte, yeah, I mean it is a matte, does give you that unevenness, and you don't really want to be building up matte on matte. So that'll get a nice little bit of a rub down, and this starts putting me into the mode of feeling that this is a real aircraft. This is all made of aluminium, and what sort of weathering effects are going to start happening on here, and how the paint will progress. This one was really all the masking done. Now I have decided to take a particular route on this Canopy, which is to put the Canopy lines on made of tape afterwards, the tape method. And the reason for that is that I was looking at the masking and I thought I'm going to be left with Canopy lines that are absolutely flush because there was no raised detail here. And that just doesn't look quite right on here. It looks... It could be better. Just the fact of a raised tape is already an improvement. But the tape is less permanent, but easier to apply. Now I looked at the windows and I looked at the layout and I thought, no, I'm sort of okay with doing tape on that. So yes, it was an issue of laziness, not wanting to mask 8 windows, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it was 8 panes, and also because of the ones that I masked recently, and when I'm finished, the actual line that remains, especially it would have been worse on this one because this has got almost no frame raised part. So, you know, there was the faintest of line to guide you, but I don't think I would have got the best of lines as opposed to a nice cleanly cut piece of tape. So I didn't want to go to all of that trouble of masking and end with a second-rate framing, whereas at least with the tape method I'm getting good framing but not permanent, can come off. Closed up all the other windows. I masked them. I didn't close them up with filler, for instance, as I was saying I might do. This has been done with pretty much exactly the same as that, and again we'll be doing slightly different methods. Oh, what I also did do was use I can't remember if I mentioned that I used the rivet wheel to put in all the lines there, and I also put the cross lines. I didn't put the horizontal, the longitudinal lines there, but I just gave it some of its detail back with a rivet wheel. I didn't do so on the bottom. That's not going to be visible to anyone, not worth the effort. So this is where we're going to be starting and where I need to actually document the process properly, and I will speak about that. P47, main wings on. Now I don't know if that dihedral is correct. All I was interested in on this model is it's on, it's the way the kit wanted it. I've got no gaps there and no gaps there. So that is what was done. On a more important model, I would try and see if something needed to be corrected, but on this one I'm okay with it just being what it is. Now visually, it's almost okay, but I'm getting a sense of something's not right. This wing looks like it's got a little bit too much dihedral, but if this was the way it was molded and this is the way it's coming out on the model, and this is going to be up against the wall as opposed to hanging from the ceiling, I think, because, you know, nice color scheme, I suppose I could hang it, but really the best method now is just like that against the wall. Then that dihedral is not going to bother me. But I do need to get good dihedral on the horizontal stabilizers. Now, most of what I want to talk about, and if we've got some minutes left, we'll get back to those aircraft, but most of what I wanted to talk about was looking at this. Get that a little bit out the way. So, and I have mentioned this many times before, and I may even have mentioned this when we talked about this model. So this is what we have at the moment on that one. Also, if I can get you to see this, not the easiest to see there. This point right here, okay, so I've got a problem with that horizontal stabilizer. By the way, there is sort of a correct up and down side because of that sink mark, which I've sanded lightly. So we want that on the bottom. This one, and less than the other one. Now when I move it like this, I also want to see if there is at least any part of the movement that matches up that bit of leading edge with the rest of it, so that I can actually get a nice continuous position. So that one's okay. This one is okay. There is a position in there where it looks correct. But, so, previously I'd stated that a little sliver of thin plastic card, or indeed what I do collect, and I forgot to mention this a number of You know, sometimes the thinnest of the plastic card is too thick, and what you want is flash. I collect much of the flash off many of the kits, though I hardly need to do so anymore because I've got so much of it. And the flash is often enough, so I cut myself a nice piece of flash, and that's enough to stop that. But because of the way this old model, I can't remember what the year was, look this up, 60s was it? This is really bad. So the flash is not going to stop that. All the flash is going to stop, the thin plastic card is going to reduce that amount by touching into there. But because of the way this structure is inside there, there's so little touching that it can wiggle right up and down. And that is why I have cut a slot in each one, and I'm drilling and I'm putting a pin in there. Now, this is not my best work. I have roughly used this saw to cut a slot in there to try and get it the right size for that. And that is, you can see that sort of just makes it in there. I need a little bit more out of there. This is my pin, but I don't want to be drilling. I don't want to be drilling through what is already so thin. So I first have to get to the base of the elevator. So I cut away the part of the tab so that I can actually do it. And the middle is not always the choice. Sometimes the thickest part might be closer to the rear, or it depends where those tabs are. So if you look at that, what you want to be doing is drilling within the thickest area. I've just chosen the middle in this case. Now, I've gone with this fairly thick drill. This little, is this Dremel? This is Mini Maxi Craft. This has been with me for 30 years plus. So I started with a thinner one that's about 1 mil. This, by the way, I've got on a nice little voltage adapter. So you can set it to quite a low volts, 3, 4.5, 6, to sort of rotate quite slowly or hard. Now it's not a high torque device, this, which means on the lowest voltage settings, and depending on what you're drilling through, it can just completely stop. So of course you do need to set it. At the moment for this drilling I was on 6 volts to drill into here. So I started with this one, and this is one of the trickier things of model building, is putting a pin into a very, very thin part. So now I know that this 1 mil is well thin enough to go in there, and with careful drilling I have it. And you always want to start with a thinner drill than what you want the pin to be, so that you can play around, because you don't often get it right, that you're absolutely, as you're starting, it wasn't quite in the center and you need to sort of ream a little bit. Now I've got that good on there, and I could be using 1 mil steel, and in this case maybe I should have, because what's actually happened, but that's why I decided to make a video, because that's quite a good trial. The difference between this and that, let's see if I can line this up in such a way that you can see. You should be able to see that in fact my pin choice, brass rod, is really a bit on the large side for this. And I've already now drilled with this drill, which is the drill for that size. This is brass rod supplied by Games Workshops. for pinning. There's a thin brass and a thicker brass. So I have then very carefully gone in, and you want to be perpendicular to this line, which happens to be the angle given on the tab, giving me my center line. If they didn't give you that, and you don't, it's not to say that that was perfect, then you would have a pin that is not actually going across into your two pieces. So you need to be drilling so that your line goes right across, meaning that the little piece of pin that I'm going to have to cut off there needs to go roughly that far. That's what that pin would have to look like. Now, how far is good enough to get in there? Because all I want is nice horizontal, and they mustn't be able to bend at all. The answer is sometimes about as far as you can get your drill in before you start seeing, and I'll show you. So this has gone in that far. Which is not very far at all, but it only needs to stop by bracing onto the other one. It only needs to stop that, and that will be completely achieved by that short pin. But if I go any further, and I have gone, are you going to be able to see that? No, I've sort of stopped myself just as it was happening. If you are ever so slightly off center as you go in, or off angle so that you're going closer to one edge than the other, you will start seeing a little thin white line just on the surface, which means you are very close to breaking through. I'm at that limit, and I'm not going any further. So that is good enough. Now, if you are doing this method, so actually, as I say, I'm like borderline success with this. Would have been actually better just to play it safe and go with a thinner steel, and then I wouldn't have needed to be that close to the edges. Now, if you need to be careful, you need to be slow, and if you see a little white line as you're sort of crazing the plastic, as you're drilling, and you're drilling quite slowly. This is not fast drilling at all. It is very slow. You just like, it's just turning over a little bit, turning over a little bit. You're really going slowly, so that any little discomfort by seeing that you are heading towards an edge, you stop. And if you feel you're actually not going to get the right, just stop, and you don't need to use the pin. Or if you wanted to at this point, you could even though I've got the bigger hole now, I could use the thinner pin and go further in. So I can now use the thin pin and go right far in like that. That's still quite a possibility. So keep your options open and don't push yourself. And if you decided, no, look, nope, not going to pin it, stop before you've damaged the surface. If you ever so slightly damage the surface, if you drill too fast, you heat the plastic and it'll just conk in right there, and then you've got a little heat mess on the surface. So just go slowly, take it easy, slow drilling on soft plastic. This is very soft plastic. If you're not happy, you've only got a small hole to fill, and you can at least you can chalk it up to experience. So now the next step is, oh, I forgot to tell you one important aspect. I took a piece of spare thickish plastic, drilled a hole with this, because as you measure this, you put these two next to each other like that, completely in line, and judge, or you can use a vernier, and they're like really, really close. You are still going to struggle to get that in there, possibly. And this one is exactly going to be in that position. This being brass, I can sand it down slightly. I could force it. If you force it, you're going to see that white line very obviously again, which means you are borderline damaging the plastic there. You can wiggle your drill slightly and just open up that hole a little bit. But ideally what I want is a pin in there that doesn't need any glue. So I glue the two horizontal stabilizers, and just with this loosely positioned, that's not even into the horizontal stabilizer yet, and of course I haven't trimmed it. You then see if it'll make it through there. It won't make it through there, so I need to widen a hole in the middle there. That's very easy, just get it in exactly the same place, roughly in the middle. You don't want to ruin the little bits of tab area so that you cause even more wobble. Cut that off at the right point, sand it down a little bit, make sure you don't have any little thicker edges right where you've used the pliers. Take your file and go around like this. I'll just take that off for now. So that's just given that a slightly sharper point, but I would actually take sandpaper and go and try and ever so slightly reduce it. I mean, test fitting the whole time. If it goes in, then it goes in. Great. This one's just starting to go in, but I can tell that it's a little bit too big, and it's going to start causing that white line on the surface. Just starting over there. And of course the other guideline of to how much of a pin you need is roughly there. So that's probably what I need. I like to practice the pinning, sometimes with thicker, sometimes with thinner, just so that I do get a little bit of practice with that, even if it wasn't absolutely necessary. I could just put glue on here, and I could glue them in, and I could sit there and judge this and hope they dry in the correct place, and then hope that I don't accidentally put a bit of pressure onto that horizontal stabilizer while I'm handling it during the painting process. But I do prefer structure to be a little bit more robust. So for instance, while I was painting this one, I was holding it on the horizontal stabilizer, which is a one piece, so you know, but I know that I have a strong enough airframe that I can actually do that. So I will go and use, I possibly don't even need to use the flash little bit of plastic, because now I've reduced to having to put little pieces of flash either side. I can put that in with the pin. Oh, that's something else I forgot to mention. So if you did your hole, but you didn't actually get that perfectly 90, and you did your other one, and I didn't, I'm showing you this specifically, that one's not bad. But what that means is that when you put your pin into there, instead of being perfectly like this, they could end up like that. They could be, and in that case you need to take your pin, take some pliers, and just give it an ever so slight kink, a couple of degrees, 1 degree, 2 degrees, just depending on how much offset you needed, so that when they're in position without any glue on, you have that. What you don't want is that or that. You don't want to have to force, and you won't force that brass rod on such a short piece, you won't force it. So you need, on a dry fit, it must be in and solid and perfect. And it'll be so good you can hold it up by one of the horizontal stabilizers without any glue on. Then you can run your Tamiya thin in and finish the deal. I'm happy enough with the wing joints. They're not 100%, but if they're 85% or so, the one is a bit better than the other one, meaning that the upper surface of the wing and the upper surface of the fillet match. On this one, the upper surface near the trailing edge is sort of okay, but around the middle there's a good step. Now that may mean, and they're both a bit raised over there, they've both got a bit of a step there, but they're both okay on the top. This right one probably could have dropped a little. Yeah, probably should have. But I fitted it as it could fit, which means I would have had to eat away a little bit of plastic with my knife to get it in. So yes, probably should have done that. The other option is that the one wing was a little bit thicker on the join, and that can happen because when your two parts are put to your leading edge and your trailing edge, sometimes the one wing is a little bit different. But in this case, I think I could have adjusted that. But as I always do say, this methodology of mine, which works for me with my approach to models, is that depending on the problems that already exist with a model, I can adjust my approach to accept further problems. There's no point being perfectionistic about something that you've already introduced or was molded with problems on it. In other words, if we decide we have a model that's a 7 out of 10, then it's okay with me having other problems that are a 7 out of 10. So we already know I've got that. Some of you have said, yeah, just sand it down. I could. We have got those that need filling. We have got the fact that I can't put on undercarriage doors because they didn't mold it in such a way that they offer for a closed setup. In fact, I'm not seeing the undercarriage mounting pins, which means that might have already been underneath there. I think they need to slot in sideways and underneath. There was like zero cockpit detail, and I'm not addressing that whatsoever, not on this model. So I can keep my approach somewhat consistent and be happy with the model by progressing forwards at the same rate at what the model is. Whereas if I'm at a 9 out of 10 model, like let's say some of those Tamiya motorbikes, or even borderline a 10 out of 10 model, I really want to keep my work at 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, so that all of I'm not introducing problems and sort of, basically messing up the model. You know, the Beaufighter is a very old model. You can rate it whatever you want. Some might rate it a 6 out of 10 for, you know, it has a nice shape. It's got pretty bad engraved lines, but it can be built into a nice model. It's got nice fit. Just one thing you will notice is that they seem to have left out some panel line here. You just have this one ending and this one ending on both wings. They might have left out some panel line, but so be it. Same with the Airfix. You know, this is a nice, you can make a nice enough model out of it, but I don't think you'd rate the model higher than about a 6 out of 10 with all of the various problems in relation to the age of the kit. But if I can have a 7 or 8 out of 10 paint scheme on it, maybe you won't bother judging it too much by the windows, I guess. Same with this one, I suppose. If I do a nice paint job on it, you won't look at the dihedral, which may be correct. I'd have to put an equal block under each wingtip and then see if the fin is in fact vertical. Sometimes you can mislead yourself, but that's looking like my eye is seeing something's off there. Where are we? 30 minutes. Okay, so we won't delve into the specific painting method of this. With that gets its own, but I need to document that as well, so that we know exactly what we're doing there. And I've sort of got this process in my mind, and it could be one of the more interesting finishes that I've ever achieved. And both of these aircraft have a lot of character. There's, they served, in wartime, they served so much and so many sorties with minimal exterior touch-ups or anything like that, that there's really, really nice wartime photos of heavy weathered aircraft. Some aircraft you don't find that as much. By the way, I've already broken off one of these, and I've somehow managed to fix it back on in such a way that it hasn't broken off again, but I need to be really careful. So by tonight, those horizontal stabilizers will be on. And probably tacking the cowling on. I could also at this stage actually put the engines in and glue those cowlings on properly, so that whatever effects I'm doing, are sort of well cohesive on the whole aircraft. But I do need to get this nose done. There's no point really going further before I have a nose on that aircraft. Okay, that's a bit of a long one. Happy modeling. Thanks for all of the messages about the job and so on. Off to inside. Cheers.